You are officially on camera.
So, do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for. That's your bag, not mine.
Everybody has last names.
Yeah, I know. Thanks everybody for having me here. It's really an honor to actually do all this work for Bernie. I feel it a privilege to be able to go around and speak for Bernie, and I've been doing that for a number of months, actually. Mostly in the early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, this beautiful state, and South Carolina. I also just did a swing through Florida, through South Florida, that was organized all by local Bernie groups. Had actually nothing to do with the national campaign, which is kind of the wonderful thing that happens through this campaign. Excuse me, literally, you have thousands, if not 10,000s of people self-organizing, coming out of their homes and saying, I want to be part of this political revolution, doing things on their own. In support of the campaign, but kind of all the T-shirts that come out, the different buttons people make. So this group of Bernie groups put together in South Florida a quick tour that I did of 6 events in 3 days, where those of you who know Florida, I went from I have to read Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota, Merritt Island, Lake Worth, Coral Gables, and Hollywood. So it was great event, and people were just so excited about the campaign and about what Bernie's been doing and how we are poised to win. I feel very confident we're going to win the nomination. I think there's a lot of work to be done and obviously a lot of challenges. So maybe I'll just talk for a few minutes and then maybe we'll just have a conversation. People ask questions about maybe perhaps about actual issues. I'd say a few things. One is that maybe the most important thing to me is to think about this moment in time. And I've been involved in politics my whole adult life, actually going back to when I was a teenager. And particularly in the last 20 years, I'd say, and certainly the last 3, 4, maybe 5 presidential elections, we always hear this following thing. This is the most important election in your life, right? Remember that? Yeah. Everybody says that.
Well, this one is.
And actually, so I've often felt like that doesn't necessarily speak to me because I've always felt like every election's important. And if you go through each election, I just think of if the Supreme Court had not handed the White House to George Bush and Dick Cheney, what the world would have looked like if that had not happened. But I do think that something different, the way I look at this election is something different, that this is an election of opportunity. An opportunity that may not come back to us in our lifetimes. And I mean that from the youngest to the older people in the room. It just may not come back to us. Because of the coming together of 2 things. One is this incredible crisis in the country that people feel really intensely at the level of the banks robbing us and creating the financial crisis that deprive people of millions of jobs and their pensions and their livelihoods, that none of them went to jail, and that this is almost going to recreate itself in the next few years. You could almost guarantee there's going to be another, excuse me, I should never drink a Diet Coke before I speak. It's almost guaranteed that something is going to happen again unless we take them on, that the billionaires and the wealthy people running Wall Street are going to manipulate the system again, and we all here sitting in this room are going to pay for it. Climate change, the way people feel strongly about that. The challenge on national security, you just go down the list, there's this incredible feeling that something is wrong. And when I do the Bernie 101 presentation, which I have these posters that I hang up, the first thing I talk about this is being the difference between the political revolution and the status quo. And that, if we went ahead and elected the status quo candidate, who's the main opponent to Bernie, it's not as if the world is going to end, given that we would be challenging the clown car Republicans who are on the other side and have very, very opposite positions, and some of them just not consistent with actually science, for example. But I see this as the chance of nothing would change in that way. It would get worse because people's incomes would still be going down, and if you just look at all the things, the challenges to people. But here we have a chance for political revolution. Literally, we could change the course of the history of the country. So that's kind of one stream.
But don't you consider that that happened already with Obama?
No.
That's
And,
where
and so let me, and then it kind of, what I was going to say, the second stream is this man named Bernie Sanders walks into the picture. And those are the two things that come together. That you rarely have the perfect storm of the situation, the environment, the landscape, and the perfect candidate. The perfect candidate. And I think that he is just this most extraordinary candidate, and I've been in politics, as I said, my whole adult lifetime. And what I say in this book, in the introduction, is that many of the political people I've met, even the good ones, all of them have a certain amount of, I think I can use this word, there's no underage people here, there's a certain amount of bullshit.
Yes, in your
With every single one of them.
Bullshit.
And I use that directly in this book. Because they're all, and even the good ones, the relatively good ones, Bill de Blasio, who's the mayor of New York, I've known Bill for 25, 30 years. Bill's a good guy, he's trying to do good things, but there's a certain amount of BS even with Bill. I'm sorry about that, Bill. I know
just kidding, Bill.
I'm being recorded. No, and I would kid him about that because that's the way they're attuned to respond. Bernie's not that way. He's the most authentic politician I've met in my lifetime. And I'm not cynical, but I'm very skeptical of politicians who come and give a certain rep. He's authentic. Yeah. And I think that is one of the reasons that he can both win the nomination because he is attracting people and igniting people and touching people in a way that no other person that I know of in this political realm at that level can do. Mm-hmm. And he's exciting people. Now to your question, it's a good kind of lead into your point about Obama. And I'm kind of channeling Bernie when I answer that question. Bernie will usually say he likes Barack Obama. He says he considers him a friend. He says there are many things that he agrees with Barack Obama. But his analysis is that if we don't change actually the structure of the way the country's run, which Barack Obama did not do for lots of reasons, we're not going to change the country. And Barack has done some good things, but now I'm speaking personally, not saying on behalf of Bernie. I'll never forget when Barack Obama won that first night, and I was in a huge hotel room with essentially African American union workers, hotel workers, and I turned around, and it was almost, and they were all crying, and they had the same feeling more intensely than I did. No, in my lifetime, I never would have thought that I would see an African American be elected president of the United States. So that in of itself, to me, was this amazing thing that happened. And there was no question that we had to elect him, given the alternative. But if you looked at where he came from, in terms of his politics, he was pretty centrist in this way. If you look at the people who supported him, Penny Pritzker, for example, one of the richest women in America, was his national finance chair. On politics, if you looked at his agenda, there's no question that he was better than, I had to think about who was the first guy he ran against, than McCain, but he was going to be a relatively centrist president. Centrist in a liberal sense, right?
Right, and don't you think he was put into that position by the Congress?
Well, you can argue which came first.
That's my concern.
Me too.
I mean, I was a Republican,
Uh-huh.
and I'm pretty well known in this community. All right, I'm not bragging. I just happen to be. All right, and I came out of the box, and they knew, and I declared I was a Democrat. And then I was very involved with supporting Barack Obama in this community, all right? And the reason why I did that was because I felt we needed someone who was willing to interact with the world rather than just say that we're the only thing on earth and the rest of you guys can just fall in line, all right?
That's a very
That
good reason.
scared me, and that was the main reason. I've been in the military, I was in Vietnam, and I wanted someone who wanted to negotiate, not kill, all right? But the thing that is they don't seem to bring up in these elections is the major problem with this is that if you elect someone like Bernie Sanders, who I think is, like just like you said, he's definitely gives you a difference. You know, you got two people that are very different, not two people that are kind of the same. But the problem goes right back to the Senate and the Congress. And if you can't, even how honest he is, and even how willing he is to do things, and the things he's talking about, I totally agree with. Right? What scares me is when he gets in there, that sounds good, but then the Republicans and the Democrats line up and shoot him down just like they did Barack Obama. Frankly, I think Barack Obama, in this last part of his term, has been pretty cool. He's learned pretty well, and he's getting at him pretty good, you know. But that's to me, as far as I'm concerned, I just love that. I just love to see him just let him scream and holler. But that's what scares me.
Okay.
It's not the fact we have a good man. It's the fact the Senate and the Congress are going to be.
So let me kind of join both of your questions together in a few thoughts about that. Both excellent points. I think that Barack Obama chose a certain path and was of a certain kind of person that put him himself in that position. I'll give healthcare as the best example. The only way we're going to change healthcare that really actually helps people is if we have a Medicare for all single payer system, because of it's just on the economics of it, which we can talk about. It's got nothing to do with, I mean, it is a moral thing, but I can argue the point on the economics. Yeah. Barack Obama never started with that, and in fact, he opposed the public option. He was not really.
Did he?
Yeah, he was not. I mean, he says, "I wanted a public option,"
Yeah,
but he
fell in line with the Democrat before him who initiated the whole thing.
You mean Clinton?
Yeah. No, I wasn't. I
Which
wasn't.
Democrat?
The one who died.
It was.
in the House.
It was initially John Edwards that ran for public option in 2008.
He's the one that he mentions all the time. That was famous and.
Well, back in 2008, it was John
Well, do you mean
Edwards.
Kennedy? Well, Kennedy was pushed healthcare forever. But my point, I think, is that I don't think Barack Obama wanted to radically restructure the government and radically restructure the way our economic system works. That's my
I don't think
opinion.
he could have. I think they would have been against him too
Don't you think he
strong.
would want it?
No, I don't. Now. But I think that the really important point you make, and this is where Bernie's strength is what happens when he gets elected. Now, I would say that that's going to happen if Hillary Clinton was elected too, unless Donald Trump is the nominee or Ted Cruz. In that case, I think actually the Democrats have a shot at reclaiming the House and the Senate. Then either of them is going to face a Republican House. Maybe the Senate's going to be Democrat, but let's be honest. When it comes to Bernie Sanders, he's even going to have opposition to try to push this in the Democratic Party. And so what I love about the way Bernie looks at this campaign is he thinks of this as a political revolution, and he thinks of this as a long-term project.
Yeah.
He talks to us as adults. Every time I go to a rally, he analyzes the corruption in politics, the lobbyists. He talks about the Federal Reserve. He talks about these very detailed things because he wants to have a real conversation with us, not just in like platitudes. And he says, when I'm elected, we can't change everything the next day. We've got to think of this as a process and a political revolution. If you said to me, and I often say this to groups, if I said to people, or someone says to me that if we work as hard as we can in the next 4 months, then 10 years from now the country's going to be totally different. I buy into that. And that's the way I think we have to look at it. That we have a chance to actually elect somebody who's committed because of his own principles and because he sees us as part of this, the political revolution. He actually talks about that, and I think he believes in it. because he understands having come from a history of barely being elected as Burlington mayor by a few votes. He had to go out and knock on doors and do the hard groundwork. Same thing when he ran for the House. You know, he really had to work hard. He sees this as a long-term project. And I think that the fact that he talks to us in that terms is encouraging to me, because he's not BSing us and saying, like a lot of people give the impression, elect me and I will solve all your problems.
Yeah.
Right?
If I may add something, just from my own personal life experience so far, I took like intro to poli-sci in college, and I didn't even always go to class. I maybe read the first 2 chapters with intensity, and beyond that, like, I really didn't.
You didn't have the right teacher.
Really not the right teacher. But to be completely honest, and kind of outing myself a little bit here, I really, even though like I am now currently working for the campaign, I do not claim to know much about, you know, I'm learning, and I actually know a whole lot more now. So I need to give myself the political machine, exactly. And the biggest thing that drew me to Bernie Sanders is the point that you're making, and the point that we can elect him, but if we don't continue being engaged, if we don't continue informing ourselves, if we don't continue paying attention and actually voting for more than just the president, right? Like, I think just the fact that there's a nomination process and not everyone is fully crystal clear on the fact that you have to nominate a person from your party before you can vote in November, right? I think that there's nothing wrong with not knowing that. I mean, in high school, for instance, I remember in history class, we never got beyond, like, World War II. Like, it was summer vacation by the time we got to the part in the book that had colored pictures. And so I just never really knew about it. And I went to college, still didn't really learn too much about it. I studied marketing, I studied communications, things like that. So the point I'm just trying to make here is, when I heard him call for a political revolution and him call for people to be engaged in a true, real, genuine way beyond this presidential nomination process, vote people in and out of Congress that are working for you. Pay attention. And I know that what I'm saying here is not just me speaking. I am hearing this across my generation. I'm hearing this across my friendship circles, the internet, like people sitting in cafes talking. This is one of the primary things that we're talking about, is that we can't stop here. We have to continue. He's calling it like it's a team.
Here's a concrete example, and then
Yeah.
very concrete
I can say
example.
one thing. Barack Obama, in my opinion, the reason why he's able to win the election and be black was because of that generation and understanding the internet, and he caught everybody else off guard, and overnight he just took them down.
And they understood how to utilize, both for fundraising purposes, which Bernie has done,
Yes.
and to create a movement. But what Barack Obama didn't do is that once he was in office, he let that whole thing wither. Organizing for America basically was a very powerful thing, and it withered away. And what Bernie, I think, is going to do is he's going to keep that intact and grow it. I want to be very concrete about this. Because we've been able to raise so much money, small donations average $27 a person. If we keep that power, that mechanism in place once Bernie's elected, then I'm going to take an example of New York. We go to Chuck Schumer, who's going to be the majority leader, who's a mouthpiece for Wall Street, and we say to him, if you don't support the breaking up of the banks, the reimposition of Glass-Steagall, what Bernie's trying to push, we're going to run a primary challenger against you. And we'll be able to raise $20–25 million. And if we've created this energy that puts Bernie in the White House, we can take those kinds of people out. And we can force them to play, and I think actually, honestly, our first challenge, and I don't mind saying this, our first challenge is with the Democratic Party. We have to get them in line before we even deal with the Republican opposition. Because there's a chunk of the Democratic Party that is captured by the same people that are paying off Republicans. Wall Street's, the lobbyists, and so on. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has got to go.
Really? Okay.
She is incompetent and one of the worst representatives of the Democratic Party. And there's actually a guy named Tim Canova, who I met in Florida by chance. He's running against her now in a primary. Excuse me. We should be able to field dozens, if not hundreds, of those candidates. I don't know you.
When you make that remark about her, what is it about her that makes her so destructive for the party?
I'm going to put aside all the issues that came up in the way she's manipulated the party.
Recently.
I'm going to put it out. I'll say she's totally incompetent.
Okay.
If you look at the time that she's been chair of the party, which has been particularly the last 4 years, the Democrats have lost the United States Senate. The Republicans have a historic margin in the House of Representatives. Most important, we've lost huge numbers of state houses, governorships, legislatures, which are really important when it comes to redistricting, drawing lines every 10 years. Now, do you say that she didn't run every campaign, but if you're the head of the DNC and she had no interest in building the infrastructure, you've got to go. If you look at the Democratic Party as a company, a CEO like that should be fired for complete failure, putting aside what she's done with Bernie. I mean, I thought that about her long before
Prior
this
to
current.
this,
Yes,
yeah.
totally incompetent. Now, I was not a huge fan of Howard Dean's in the way that people were Deaniacs, if you remember. But I do think that Dean, when he talked about a 50-state strategy for Democrats, had a point, which Bernie talks about a lot. Bernie has pointed out a number of times, Barack Obama, without campaigning at all in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, basically the Democrats conceded that in the general election. We still got something like 40% of the vote, maybe in the high 30s, low 40s. What would have happened if we actually had a populist candidate like Bernie going in like Robert F. Kennedy did when he toured the South to look at poverty? We went to those small communities and we built democratic infrastructure.
What
Why
does
couldn't
30
we?
30 to 40 percentage points represent?
I'm sorry?
What were those?
They voted for Obama.
Okay.
So-
Without any-
Without even setting foot in those states, I think we all know, there's what both parties do. They focus on the battleground states,
Right.
and they basically concede. So you will never see in New York State, Nevada. You always have a contested state. In New York State, I never see an election ad during the general election unless I watch a national cable show and one pops up, because nobody cares about New York. If you're living in California, you never see
Okay, I
it.
just wasn't sure which election you were talking about.
I was talking about the general election
Last
when
one.
Obama ran the first time in 2008, and I think it was true. I think Bernie was mainly talking about the first time he ran.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to say is that this project, if I can call it, this political revolution, it's not going to be solved the moment he's inaugurated. But I feel that this is the best opportunity for us to really make a huge change in the country, with all the troubles and all the challenges.
I've been thinking lately that this really is coming down to a conflict of classes, and not like, the classes of paying attention, being sophisticated on any level politically, and those people versus the people, and that would be the Bernie people. But are they speaking too sophisticated? I don't want to sound weird about this, but what's resonating with the Trump, and it's just so black, white, they're bad, they're good, and that's where he's getting his momentum without saying anything flowery or anything in depth. And will we be able to do that, fight that?
Well,
That group of people who only want, he's terrible, she's good. And will that message of really, it scares me.
there's a part of America, I don't know what we can put a percentage on, that's very willing to be captured by people like Trump based on anger and pointing their finger at someone and blaming
And
someone
not a
else.
whole lot of sophistication as far as
I think
the
that's,
issue to me.
but here's what I would say. The other side is that, number one, if you look at the polls, Bernie is actually beating
That's
Trump and Ted Cruz, and I think Rubio, and he's beating Trump by a bigger margin than Hillary Clinton, almost double. So I don't remember the number, but it's something like she's leading by 7 or 8 points over Trump, and Bernie's leading by 13. And the reason is, in my opinion, I think that when Bernie speaks, he can appeal to a big chunk of independents and people who are, light Democrats, I call them, a huge number, because he is speaking. I mean, when he says we have to break up the big banks when he says if they're too big to fail, they're too big to exist. When he says the government's being bought by Goldman Sachs, and he points out that Hillary Clinton has been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, that resonates. That's pretty straightforward, and everybody agrees with that. There's nobody in this country, well, no, I was speaking exaggeration. 70% of the country, I'll bet you more, agree with the proposition that you can be Democrats, Independents, Republicans, that the government is corrupt, that it's been bought by lobbyists, right? That's a bipartisan feeling. That
yeah, go ahead.
because of the campaign finance reform situation. And Bernie hammers that nonstop. He talks about that relentlessly. He says, every program that we want to advocate for, if we don't change the structure of America and the way campaigns are financed, if we don't stop the lobbyists from buying politics, we can't change America. And to your point, I think that resonates. That's pretty simple language that most people feel like, and it's the reason people don't vote. They think, why should I vote? It's not important. I'm not important. They're not going to listen to me. It's billionaires that are buying. And Bernie talks about that very well.
I have a coffee group, and I almost don't go because politically they're so far off where I am, and it's almost spooky. I just don't bring it up. But they know it. But the thing is that what I take from them is Hillary is, forget her.
She's the devil to them.
They hate her.
Now, are these, when you say they don't, are they rock rib down the line Republicans, or are they independents who feel like everybody's corrupt? You know what I mean?
They're probably more.
They're rock.
Probably a little combination of both.
Okay.
All right. But they're leaders in the community.
Yeah.
All right.
Fair enough.
And so, and this is what he said. I think Bernie, if you are to be able to create this amazing, whatever it is, okay. He's going to have a far better chance of winning than Hillary.
I agree.
Because people will not vote for her. Because of her, she brings with her all the baggage of all that crap that goes on with the Bushes and the Clintons and all that she brings it with her, and she might be a pretty decent person, but she brings that crap with her.
And some of it, I'm willing to acknowledge this up front. Some of that is sexism. Some people in this country, and I actually, I want to see a woman president.
Black,
yes, and I think we have to have a woman president, but I want somebody whose principles
Well, I know the one I want,
but the problem is that let's face it, in the country there's still sexism, there's still bias against women in power. That's a piece of it, but it is also about the sense that, at least among Democrats and independents, that she's beholden to special interests, and that's, in my opinion, a fact.
You really do believe she is.
Another.
She's I want to hear more from. Here's what Bernie says. He said this the other day in Iowa. He says, and I'm going to paraphrase it because he did it better. You have to be a really, 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 really good speaker to get paid $225,000 for a speech. And then somebody in the audience said, older gentleman in the third row who was right in front of Bernie, this was in Carroll, Iowa, shouted out, no, it was $600,000. He was talking Goldman Sachs, and Bernie smiled and said, no, that was for 3 speeches. And my point there is, you don't get paid that amount of money other than to be bought. Because let's say I'm the average.
And people aren't dumb about that.
That's right, and that's my point about the way Bernie can speak to the people without, that aren't sophisticated.
Is he coming here?
Oh, I don't know about that. I have nothing. That's above my pay grade.
Well, you need to make that important.
That's way above my pay grade. So Clinton is completely, and you look at all her contributions. I debated this on CNN the other day, and they had no response to this. That's why people, if I'm the average contributor to Bernie, $27, and let's say I contributed that money to Hillary Clinton, whose phone call is she going to return? That average contributor of $27 or the Goldman Sachs person who gave them $225,000? We're smart enough to know the answer to that.
Yeah.
It's the way politics works. And the last point, and so to circle back, in every speech, and people seem to think that Bernie repeats this too much. I don't.
No, not
This
too
point,
much.
this point is very important because what he says is all the beautiful proposals, and I think he said it in the last debate. It was certainly in one of the debates. He said all of the proposals that we have on this stage, none of them matter, none of them will happen until we stop the corruption of politics.
So how's that, what's the first thing I'm gonna do when I get into office to deal with that?
About that,
Yeah,
the first thing he wants to do is overturn Citizens United, which allowed essentially all this to happen. I mean, in the gross way,
legislatively?
one of the things he says is he will not appoint anybody to the Supreme Court that is not committed to overturning Citizens United. Now, again, I honestly think this is a political revolution piece because just what we all agree, every people in Republican districts, Democratic districts think that the politics are corrupt. And I'll bet you the right campaign, the moment he goes in the office, if he stood before the people and said, I want now all Republicans, all Democrats, all independents to call their representative and say that the legislation I'm now introducing, whatever we call it, the Fairness in Politics Act, which will overturn Citizens United, you want them to support. I'll bet you would have a mass amount of people coming out on that.
Yeah, that's what people sort of, at least I did, expected that Barack Obama could do, like on healthcare, really mobilize the people. But like you said, he kind of held back.
Can I take that? So, similar to Jane, I was inspired. I hadn't heard of Bernie before I saw his initial speech, and I was caught off guard and a little wary when he, from the beginning of his campaign, he said, "I cannot do this alone. We need people to be more involved with politics after I get elected." And I'll bring this all around. So, part of his campaign is, you can't just put me in there and expect it to get fixed. We touched on this. We need more and more people to speak out and get involved. And I'm going to give an example on the Republican side. In Kansas, Heartland, Kansas, right? Reddest state you'll see. Kansas was an incredibly blue progressive state in the beginning of the 20th century. And then in the early 90s, when there were Democrats, there were Republicans, but it was generally a Democratic state, the pro-life group, the anti-abortion group, and I don't recall their name, got up in arms about abortion, and Planned Parenthood was protested, and they shut down for a week. And what the pro-life people realized is that if they get out en masse, they will shut down Planned Parenthood. And all of a sudden, thousands and thousands of pro-lifers chain themselves to fences, like lie down on highways, stop themselves in front of parked cars, and shut down the city, essentially. And Kansas went Republican because so many people who cared about an innocent life, and by the way, I'm pro-choice, not pro-life, realized they can make a difference. And so what happened over the course of 4 or 6 years, in an election cycle or two, every single long-standing Democrat and modern Republican was kicked out of office because all of these pro-lifers came out of nowhere with one thing on their mind: end abortion, and totally revamped the entire state system. The state legislature, the representatives from Kansas, etc. And now you see far right-wing Tea Party people, pro-life people, dictating our national policy, such that Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House now, has tried to pass an anti-abortion bill like 6 times, and Obama's the only one that's keeping it off. Now imagine that with what Bernie has right now nationally. It's not just in Kansas, it's with over 1 million donations, with contributors, 2.5 plus contributions, but from 1 million people, with this crazy grassroots movement, people, independents coming out of the woodwork the way these pro-lifers came out, who have never voted, who have never been engaged before, and you have this lackluster establishment vote in existence that votes for the establishment candidates that are not Bernie Sanders. What happens when all of these people, for a few years, vote en masse and completely clear out the system? And that's what he's hoping for, is that yes, we'd eventually write to people, But at some point, all of these people, what if he gets a mandate, 60-70% of the national vote? I know that's, could happen.
I would take 56%,
Yeah.
which would be kind of a landslide, actually.
And that would be a mandate. And what if he used that network that we've set up to get people to vote regularly for Senate, for the House?
That's a good
Then
point.
the people who are dictating the policy that we touched on over here, they would no longer be calling the shots.
But you know what, you actually, and you don't have to use, you can use, that's a great example, but you can also use things that are, you know, more in line with my politics, I would say. If you had told me 5 years ago that it would be the law of the land, that anybody could marry anyone they would want to,
Yes.
I would have said, you're smoking something. But the way that changed is because millions of people organized around that. We completely shifted the political belief about marriage equality.
You know, and
Overnight.
I think they're figuring that out too.
And I can give, you know, the debate right now about the minimum wage, $15 an hour minimum wage. People are now having to respond to that, and Hillary Clinton has had to put out a much weaker proposal for $12. But the reason that's happened is because millions of people have organized in the streets and have shifted the conversation. And I think that that's exactly what we have to do. But we have to get somebody in place that has the bully pulpit as the anchor for us to build that over 10 years.
So,
And
I kind of saw a couple times over the last couple of years, Ralph Nader speaking on it.
Yeah.
He's got a book out, Left, Right Coalition is building.
Yeah.
There somewhere, building. And I see that in the general election, taking the voters as far as corruption and anti-monopoly. Trump has anti-monopoly. Oh yeah, he's a big anti-business candidate, sure. But if people are listening to that, you know, he's going to pull some. Sanders is going to bring somebody there. But back to the primary, there's this attack. I call it attack. That just occurred. Atlantic magazine article by Ta-Nehisi Coates, because Bernie Sanders rejected the call for reparations for slavery, that he's unfit as a candidate. What's that? Hillary's going for that? You know what I mean?
She's digging. But
So,
you know,
what do you make of that?
well, he's a smart man, Coates, and he's written I have not read the book, but a quite well-reviewed book. But I don't think I happen to think that that's something that we should talk about. I don't think that's going to have much traction in the Democratic primary if you're for or against reparations. I don't think that's going to be an issue.
It's suddenly, you know, blasted onto the scene as, oh, this should be obvious to everybody why you can't vote for him because their positions are so different. I can't get the logic of it. So, but
I don't.
Are they digging deep here or going some way that I don't?
I could be wrong. I just don't think that's going to become the defining issue. In the same way, by the way, that I don't think at the end of the day, guns is going to be an issue about how people vote Bernie versus Hillary. I think that people are pretty smart. Some people are going to vote just one issue, but I think people who go to the polls, they end up kind of connecting various things that they care about. So I don't get focused on one particular thing.
Yeah.
And there are going to be a lot of things that pop up.
Yeah, no, that was.
She had a question.
We absolutely
well, I
need,
want
they need to head
we
out.
have to go
Yeah,
back.
they have to
to
go
work.
back to work. They took
Okay.
their lunch break to come talk
So
to us.
let's let you ask
I'm
the
gonna
first
make
question then.
very succinct.
It was nice to meet you all.
Likewise.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll be by in a few minutes.
Okay, it was very nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. I hope to see you again.
They've been here for over an hour, so I really appreciate
Good to
it.
see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so
Please
much.
come
I
back.
will.
Definitely. You're fully
Be
invited.
informed.
We'll do
All right, thank you.
I have him in my phone as Paul Dahl.
Take care, Amanda. Bring one friend.
She's related to Buddy Mitchell.
To who?
Buddy Mitchell, he's the big-time conservative poet
Oh,
in this area. He's probably one of the more famous poets, Western poets for the cowboy football.
wow.
When I saw her here, I about dropped my pants. But, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Well,
Grandma.
you made a comment and I wanted to add on to it because you used the term
What's that
the
music?
10 years.
Was that me? Oh, I'm sorry. What the heck
I
is
was kind
that?
of enjoying it as a kind of
Yeah, that was really nice.
music.
You know, when you got
It's pretty
I
relaxing.
sort of know. Oh, go ahead. Take care of it, we'll continue.
You mentioned about the outlook 10 years, and I wanted to build on that in a scenario of vision, because we are looking for a future to believe in. And the definition of future, I think, relates to your 10 years, and I see it like this. A lot of us that have this expanded mindset are Bernie supporters, because there is a certain, one of the ladies that just left quantified that there are what she called the Trump supporters who are following the anger rhetoric, and then there's others who are looking at it in a sense of logic, rationale, and I think to a certain extent ability to use their intellect. And that's very important. So relative to where we are currently is the present, that we are as futurists, because we have to have insight into making the changes that you've laid out, that Bernie's policies look at and analyze and how to make it better, that we are looking at what we want in a finished building. We want to have all of these types of futuristic, and I'm just using that as a kind of metaphor to bring home the point. Now, to build that building, we need to start with digging the hole to lay the foundation. And that's what this is about. We can't go into the future thinking that we can build stick frame houses based on the changes in mindset about what the future looks like in totality. And that is why the younger generations, however you want to label them, I personally am not about in Bernie Sanders for me. I'm thinking about my 24-year-old, my 44-year-old, and I'm thinking about my granddaughter who's 6.
Right.
And I think that what I want for them, if we envision Bernie's outcomes as his policies, is going to make me go to my grave.
Well, hopefully it's optimistic in the sense that you will get to experience and enjoy all that yourself. You know, certainly your grandchildren will, but you'll have plenty of time to enjoy that for yourself for many years to come.
Thank you.
If we're, yes,
You know,
great point.
one thing, you know, I'm really fed up with people who are in politics to make a living. And I don't think that's the way it was designed, but and people who are in there for 25 years, that really gnarls me. But one thing, Obama, he made some he took the younger generation and he almost made some promises that to try and make them believe that they would all happen while he was president. Okay. And the thing I think that for Bernie is really smart is that he can take fault, come in kind of using that, but making them honest with them about the fact we're not going to get this done. And that to me is very important, because that's honesty. And this younger generation is smart. They are not dumb, and they will be the ones, I think, who will determine this election.
And that's a great point. And I agree with it, that he is very honest. And he keeps saying, I don't know, I've heard him now hundreds of times, every single speech he says, it's not about me.
In the front and the back of the speech.
Yes, it's the political revolution.
Yeah.
Just your point. And like I said before, I love that about someone
Well, I do too.
that says it, because he's being honest, to your point.
That's right.
And he's treating us like adults.
Another thing that gets
You know?
me, the fact he's been a politician, and you know, and Trump said all about the fact I haven't been. But in a way, the way things are right now, it's important to have been a politician, because he understands the system, and he has a pretty good idea what he can and can't get done. Where the other one is just blowing smoke.
Well, I once wrote an article. This is a really.
Excuse me, I've got to go too.
All right. Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Everybody, nice to see you
Nice
again.
to see you.
Don't forget your bowl.
Thank you.
You'll get it.
I want to go.
Oh, he's-
Let me
okay.
pick up that bowl and let me make sure I get together with you about my district here, because
Anyway,
we're taking.
Do you feel
lunch.
that way in regards to the fact, being honest and saying, you're not gonna get this done? And
He's, oh yeah. I was gonna make the point before he jumped in.
Yeah, let's do
Jumped in
that.
about that. Oh, about Trump. You know,
Thank you so much.
I
Take
wrote
care.
this piece once, actually for an Australian paper, because I was living in Australia at the time of the 2012 election. And it was when Romney ran. Business executives are the worst people to have as president of the United States. And it is always amazing to me, and the media builds them up because they're all in awe with Michael Bloomberg, Romney, remember who was the other guy who was gonna run for president, was a business person. Everybody think, great,
why?
because, here's why.
Why, yeah.
We live in a democracy. These guys are used to being dictators. You can't, they're the worst kind, they're not made up. Can you imagine Trump trying to negotiate with Congress?
Oh,
And
yeah,
saying,
that's,
"Go
if
fuck
anybody's thinking,
Go for it.
When's he
And there's
gonna
some,
get accomplished?
or he goes, to your point about the world, he goes overseas and he has to deal with someone like Putin or so on. You can't have people
you'll have,
who are by nature,
you'll have a world war overnight.
you can't have people who are by nature dictators. You have to be able, companies are essentially not democracies. They're the opposite for democracies. And it's the way they're structured. We don't have co-ops, they're not run as that's not the way they're run.
I'm not too excited about lawyers either, though.
All right, fair enough. I mean, that's fair. But in terms of the awe of people who are CEOs, this was always what amazed me. The people think that Trump, first of all, Trump is, well, whatever. I just think that that's bizarre. And companies are also actually, the way how am I want to say this? They deal, like their revenue streams and so on, in the best circumstances, in open markets, right? You trade. Excuse me. Societies are actually closed markets in a way. There's certain things that are just set in place that you can't have this kind of, I'm going to do this. You just have to deal with some realities. It's a completely different system. So I always thought that business executive, big deal.
I've been an insurance agent for 50 years, and I insure these different kinds of people. And people that are in jobs, and when they say jump and you say how high, okay, you got to be careful of those kind of people.
That's right.
Because they're not used to negotiating, they're used to having,
And most
like
people-
for example, the doctor who just came out. Man, I've insured a lot of doctors. My brother's a surgeon, and he's a very nice person. We don't believe it. We're not politically there, but and I know what kind of mindset that is. I've been living with them.
And almost every CEO is that way. That's the way they're bred, and that's the way they're born to operate. There's very few of them. I mean, maybe in a small business of 10 people, where you're running a little internet company, there's more democracy and so on. But ultimately, actually, even in those companies, there's a CEO and he or she is the boss.
That's right.
And you can't have that. That's not a democracy. Anyway, that's why I always react to Trump as being running the country. It seems like that would be, oh my God.
I'm sure you know the dynamics of the state, because where you are here, it's everybody in this, practically everybody up here hates the government.
Yeah, I got a sense of that. Just
Okay, because if you figure with a state where about 93% of the state is owned by the government,
yeah.
and like ranchers and stuff like that, they will make a relationship with a BLM or a forest person, and with certain ones, and really get things done. And then they pull that person out and bring in some person that doesn't know jack and wants to change, and just total chaos. And they've been dealing with that kind of situation for 50 years. And so government, and the only thing they want they want, the state to take over the land. But I don't trust the state either, so.
Right.
Okay, but the point is, you realize that Vegas is conservative and Reno is pretty liberal, okay, in their voting. And up here, they're major conservative.
But isn't Vegas, this is a question, I thought the Vegas politics is heavily influenced by the Culinary Workers Union. Because they're very powerful, they have 40,000 members, mostly heavily Latino.
Yeah,
Hasn't
well,
that-
that Latino population definitely.
But hasn't that changed the
And
politics of
yeah,
Las
that probably
Vegas
has.
a little bit?
That's another thing, the Latino population, where you're willing to be friendly, man, that is a major. They better, the Republicans haven't figured it out how these other civilizations or denominations in this state, in this United States, how strong they are.
Well, it is one reason that mainstream Republicans, and I'm trying to figure out who that would be. How do you define a mainstream Republican? They're in massive panic that Trump will be the nominee because they say we can't win congressional elections. Forget the presidential election. But if he's the nominee, it will be a complete avalanche against the Republicans because, number one, Latinos were going to vote. And generally, we're all immigrants, most of us, my parents were both immigrants. And think about all the people who are going to say, F that guy, we're all immigrants. And they're going to have massive losses. There's no question, Trump energizes a particular population that shows up for those rallies, who are angry about their jobs and are pointing their fingers at people of color and other people. And there's no question he'll have a certain vote, but that ain't a vote to win a general election. That's like a vote that's basically about disaster for them, which we could all pray for. You know? I mean, I wake up every day.
I don't want that kind of disaster.
Well, if you're thinking politics-wise, I would love it to be Sanders versus Trump, because then you're looking at the possibility of actually Bernie coming into office and starting out the political revolution with a smaller task, slightly less.
He's going to go against the political revolution.
Well, he'll have fewer Republicans in office because they'll be defeated. My guess is the Democrats will definitely then get back the Senate. Just think of all the people that are going to vote against Trump. They think he's crazy.
Yeah.
But there's a long way to go. You know, I've decided that I'm not spending too much time thinking about who's going to be the Republican nominee because who the heck knows? That's like crazy.
That's crazy.
It's a great show, though. You know, it's kind of.
I have got to run.
All right. So you're going to come back at 4.
Yeah, I'll come back at 4.
I will drive my if depending on how the people are here ready to wrap up, we'll drive my car, which is right out in front.
Okay.
Awesome.
For a little.
Awesome.
Thanks very much. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you for coming, and I'm excited for the tour. This will be a good thing.
Very good.
All right.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I like it. We're going to see you at 4.
Okay.
Thanks for the riveting discussion. I learned a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. You brought up so many good points.
I've been around too long.
That's what we got to listen to,
Okay.
right? It's called experience.
I don't think I lose that and I'm in trouble. Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll see you then.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
Let's see you.
Is there another session with the students or?
Yes, so at 3 o'clock
3
we're going to have
o'clock.
another session.
Which you're welcome
But-
to stay for.
Yeah,
right?
definitely. Please stay for it.
What time is it? Not